Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here. We are continuing our series of previews on SEC football teams and their schedule. Today we get the Ole Miss Rebels, who had a fine season a year ago, 10 wins, and a team that is missing a lot of faces that produced for them last year. But Ole Miss reloaded through the transfer portal. It's got looks like a top 20 team according to most polls and forecasts I'm seeing. Blake, it should be another good season in Oxford for Coach Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, good looking roster. I think, we'll go through and kind of talk about our actual predictions for them in the next couple of weeks. But, looking at this schedule, it is a roster I think that can certainly navigate the first half of the schedule, but it is kind of a tale of two halves because, I think you look at the first 6 games and you look at the last 6 and it's, it's all SEC West on the back end. Front end is all non-conference and your 2 SEC East games. So it's kind of, kind of an interesting setup, I think, just in terms of scheduling. Realistically, they could be 6-0 and then, go into a pretty interesting gauntlet of SEC West opponents after that. So,
well, my philosophy on teams that are rebuilding. Rebuilding's not the word here, but maybe starting with a lot of new commodities, whether that's a new coach, a new system, a new quarterback, mass departures that have been replaced. I like breaking in things a little gently rather than going Alabama, Georgia off the bat. And the Rebels has certainly done that. Hard to see Ole Miss being anything other than 4-0 headed into the Kentucky game October the 1st because Troy, Georgia Tech, Tulsa, in the computers and the human ratings I'm seeing all ranked in that 80 to 95 area. So very similar teams there. Central Arkansas, the team in between that in week 2, did not receive any votes in the preseason FCS poll, which came out, I think, today. And last year, if those teams had played in Oxford, I think Jeff Sagarin's got that as a high 30s spread in Ole Miss's favor. So hard to see Ole Miss being anything other than unbeaten heading into that first SEC game with Kentucky.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. I think anything less than 5-1 in your first 6 games, you're disappointed. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And look, the only way you're not disappointed in 5-1 is if that loss is to Kentucky in a close game at home. A loss to anyone else, I think that's a game you shouldn't lose. So that's why I think this is one. We've gone through these schedules for other SEC teams and we've talked about just all the different possibilities and all this. Like, this is the most straightforward, I think, first 6 games of any schedule we've looked at so far.
I would agree with that.
I'd say the entire schedule, right? Like, it's pretty much, again, the first 6 games. Like I said, I think they'll be favored in their first 6 games. The Kentucky one, I think, will be a field goal game. We talked about some of those, but I think that's a very entertaining, close game, more than likely between those two. But like this schedule is not that hard to break down because you look at these first games, like you said, Troy, Georgia Tech, Tulsa, Central Arkansas, they're, by all accounts, they will probably be average or lesser teams. And then beyond that, like I said, you would expect Ole Miss to beat Vanderbilt just based on what the expectations are for Vanderbilt. And that game against Kentucky is the one you circle. So,
yeah, the last time Ole Miss and Kentucky played, that was 2020, and Ole Miss won that one 42-41. I don't know how many points have he scored in that one this year. Kentucky always pretty salty on defense. It's got a top-notch quarterback in Will Levis. It's got a running game in Chris Rodriguez. That may be whoever can control the tempo, and we know Ole Miss loves to play fast, wins that game.
Yeah, I think so. I think that'll be like I said, I think that'll be a pretty entertaining game. Really, when you look at it, I think that'll be one of the, I don't know what the entire October 1st schedule is, but I would have to think that's when you're going to circle just based on what you could get from both offenses. I think it's a high scoring type game. And like we said, I think that's the game that you really look at here and you're like, man, that's the one that probably is, if you win that one, I think you're looking at 6-0. heading into that October 15 game against Auburn. So
Yeah, October 8th at Vanderbilt. Ole Miss won that one 31-17 last year. The year before, crushed Vanderbilt in Nashville in that winless season for the Commodores. It snapped a 2-game losing streak last time Ole Miss came to Nashville, but programs are in totally different places. Ole Miss, I'm guessing, going to have more fans in the stands than Vandy that day, even though it's in Vandy's building. So Ole Miss plays 5 road games this year, but Vanderbilt being one of them, and I'd question whether that's a true road game given what we've seen in the stands in Nashville the last few years.
yeah, I mean, I don't, you can probably, if you've watched all of our other schedule previews, you've probably heard it. I just don't, as of right now, I mean, finding wins for Vanderbilt is going to be a challenge in my opinion. So, especially SEC wins. So yeah, I think that's just like you said, it is kind of what it is at this point. You kind of know what you're getting when teams play in Nashville, at Vanderbilt, and it's a lot of opposing fans are in there, so that will not be necessarily just a full on true road game for Ole Miss. So,
well, one interesting game in the first half of Ole Miss's schedule, and I think we'd both agree that is Kentucky.
yeah,
The last half, I think all these are interesting, other than maybe Alabama, but that is in Oxford. Let's start with Auburn. That was a team a year ago. Auburn's kind of last stand for the football season was beating Ole Miss. That was in Auburn in a game that was pretty close, and Auburn pulled away kind of late from the way I remember listening to it. But that'll be a big game, as we've said with Auburn in the other previews. A lot of that is where is Auburn's season, how much heat is coming down on Brian Harsin. That's got a lot to do, I think, with the way this one ends potentially. Although it's still October 15th, so the walls may not have crashed in yet if it's going to end up being a bad season for the Tigers.
yeah. For some reason, we did our Auburn preview, and I saw one of the comments about. I think someone had said that we just made this a full on gimme for Ole Miss. I don't think that's what
No.
we did at all. I don't think we ever said this was just going to be a lock victory for Ole Miss because I don't think it is. But I did see that and thought it was kind of funny. But no, I mean, this is one of many. Like you said, we'll go down the list here. I even throw the Alabama one in there. I think that's interesting because it's in Oxford. So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, this is, like you said with Auburn. I think what it was we kind of said this in I think it was the LSU preview. We said just kind of those 4 teams: Ole Miss, Mississippi State, LSU, and Auburn. I think there's just a lot of, I don't know. There's a lot of potential outcomes, but I think when you look at Ole Miss's schedule and you compare Ole Miss's schedule to maybe, the other 4, just in terms of how it sets up, this is where things get fascinating. Like we said, because it's that kind of first 6 and then this 6. But yeah, starting with Auburn, I think that's a nice one to start with of this back half of the schedule because, it is a team that I think there's a wide variety of outcomes you could get from them. And honestly, we could say the same thing about their October 22nd opponent against LSU. So.
Well, and let's be clear on Ole Miss, too. Matt Corral was one of the best quarterbacks, one of the best players in the country a year ago. We have no idea that if Jackson Dart, I shouldn't say no idea, but there's no guarantee he comes in and they just pick up where they left off either. So, and
No,
we'll get into that later. But, yeah, but worth noting again, Auburn did win that one last year. I'm going to give you an aside. Tell me if you buy this. I think if you take out Georgia, Alabama, and Vanderbilt, the SEC this year is almost like the NFL. You could maybe count Missouri in that too. But in other words, week to week, let's just pick a couple of teams at random. South Carolina and Texas A&M. Texas A&M would win that game, but it's like the Jets beat a couple teams every year too in the NFL and sometimes beat some good teams. It just seems like there's, to me, a lot of parity between, and somebody argue on Texas A&M. I don't know that I'm there yet, and I may get there, but I think there's a lot of parity from 3-4 down to 12 and maybe even 13.
Yeah, I feel like we've always said that about the West over the past however long, but I feel like you can more apply that to the East now. With the changes that are made. I think with Florida having a new coach, we said South Carolina could be sort of sneaky. You expect Kentucky to be good. You expect Tennessee to be good. So I think that's when you're tying that in. I think the East feels a little more unpredictable now than maybe it has been in recent years, where it's just been, all right, Georgia's probably winning this thing. Maybe Florida takes a run at them, and everybody else just kind of felt below that notch. But I don't think that's the case anymore. And like you said too, I think with the West specifically, and I, it's funny. I think we did talk about this in LSU one too. It's like even if we said it, like there's some publications picking LSU to finish last, but LSU fans, they think they got a shot to, I don't know if they think they're going to eclipse Alabama, but they think we can get up there to 2 or something, right? And I think that's everyone in the SEC West. And again, I think A&M probably is the one that thinks they can win the West. Ole Miss maybe thinks, quarterback situation works out. Maybe they think they can win the West with how the schedule plays out. Who knows? So yeah, I think that's always the situation with this division is we can look at this entire slate here, right? Of looking down the line here for Ole Miss. And we can tell you why we think they got a shot in a lot of these games, if not every game on the schedule here. But it's also you have to, I think, respect the opponent and understand that A&M's top 10 team, Alabama's preseason #1, Arkansas top 20 team probably, right? So like there's a lot of these games that really could go either way. It's just I think it goes back again to those first 6. We're not saying it's a lock they're going to be 6-0 because like I said they could lose to Kentucky, but I think that's just your expectation for this team looking at the roster. You expect them to be in a good position heading into this back half here. And if that's the case, you built up quite a bit of momentum going into the toughest part of your schedule.
Well, here's one thing that's got to make you feel good if you're Ole Miss. Now, we can debate how much relevancy it carries going into the season, but a common denominator throughout the grab your popcorn game in Tuscaloosa, Ole Miss beat 4 of the final teams on its schedule a year ago.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah.
Well, the next one on the list is LSU. Again, hard to tell where LSU is. I'd rather have LSU in week 2 or 3, I think, than I would where it is on the schedule. That, of course, in Baton Rouge, I presume that'll be a night game, which is always a brutal atmosphere to play in. But LSU thin on the offensive line. You don't know how that's going to play out at that point in the season. Ole Miss, I mentioned Ole Miss has got a lot of stuff to change too, but LSU is changing coaches and schemes, which is a little bit more involved, I guess. So you've got that. Then you've got a trip to College Station in a game. Let me check this. Yeah, Ole Miss definitely won that game a year ago, and I can't read the score, but I think it was 26-16. But, I mean, again, we talked about A&M. We've said this ad nauseum. These schools with lofty expectations and coaches on hot seats, you just don't know how those seasons are going to play out at that point of the season. I think that's a fascinating game.
Yeah, no, it is for sure. Like you said, I think the hesitation some people have with A&M is just that we've been in this spot before, and they maybe haven't reached that college football playoff level that I think in some years that people thought they should get to. And so yeah, I mean and here's the thing I'll say about Ole Miss when you tie in all their opponents. I think and it's the biggest question, like you said. I don't know if it is the biggest question, but is what offensively, there are going to be some things that you're going to be able to get very creative. And you feel like you're always going to have a chance. So I think that's something that you kind of always keep in mind with Ole Miss is knowing who your coach is. You're always going to be a play away from changing a game. And I think without, Matt Corral, that's a little bit different. But I think just seeing how that transition goes, I just feel like within the confines of the offense, you feel like you're always going to have a chance. Now it's, you got to stop people. And, maybe there are days where your offense isn't at its best. And that's where can you get enough stops to slow down some of these other teams that are going to put up points? Bama's going to put up points, A&M's going to put up points, and so forth. So, yeah, so I think that's something too you keep in the back of your mind if you're trying to be Ole Miss, if you're trying to be optimistic about Ole Miss. I think it's just, the system you play in, the offensive minded head coach that it's proven that he can put his guys in a position to, kind of make those game changing plays. That is, I mean, that's why I don't think you can look at any of these games and be like, all right, that's a definite loss, right? Like, I just don't think you can do that with Ole Miss just for that reason. So
it's starting to feel a little bit Hugh Freeze-ish with them, where the defense, you kind of white knuckle it at times. Although Ole Miss's defense was probably a little better than given credit for being a year ago. But offensively, it's kind of what you said. Their scheme and the play calling and everything seems to give them a chance against almost anybody. And, of course, nobody in the middle part of last decade was more a nemesis to Alabama than was Ole Miss.
Yeah. And I mean, again, we know the storyline that's always involved with that. And I
Yeah.
think that is something that, that will play into it too. So yeah, I mean that's something to think about. I think it's just with Ole Miss when you look at all of these games on their schedule, um, I think they've got a chance, to be one of those. I don't know if surprise is the word, right? Like we're looking at the Phil Steele preview. He does his what is it, the top? He does like his top 10 surprise teams. So like he
Yeah.
goes through and picks who are going to be the surprise teams, and he had Ole Miss at 7 this year.
I don't know
And
that that's a surprise. I mean,
well, and that's the thing is right is, but I think it's in relation to maybe just the overall, expectations, I guess you could say, because like in the power poll, he has them at 26. So that's not, they're basically a top 25 team, but I think it's okay. Like we said though, if you really look at it, let's say they win these first 6 games, even if they go 5-1, right? It's not out of the realm of possibility they could beat Auburn on October the 15th, maybe even win at LSU. So again, let's say best case scenario, my goodness, you're
at
8
that
0.
point, they're a top 5 team
Yeah,
nationally.
like you're in the top
Right.
5. You're 8-0, you're in the top 5. So I think that's maybe kind of how he's viewing that. So it is fascinating. I think it's, but like I said, I don't think that there's outside of the non-conference games, which I don't want to call them gimmies, but I think they're pretty close to gimmies.
Yes, they are.
When you compare them maybe to others. But outside of that, man, I think the setup is good to where, and it goes back to your first point is you like to ease into things. Like this is one of those things where like you're not playing Alabama in week 2. You're not playing you've got a schedule to where if you want to try to figure some things out offensively and get, your quarterback acclimated to how you want to do things, I think you got a great 6 games to start doing that. And like we said, it maybe even where Auburn's at in week 7. Maybe that's another opportunity. So yeah, I'm not against this whole idea that Ole Miss could kind of be one of those teams that, and that's what I said. I think that's why Phil still probably listed them as a surprise team, just because I think there's a potential that they could. I don't know if they had double digit wins, but man, they've got a chance to do a lot of damage, I think. So
Well, and to backtrack a little bit, Ole Miss only plays one of its first 7 games in a hostile environment, and that's Georgia Tech. And
yeah,
hostile, I don't know how hostile it's going to be. I think Ole Miss has a pretty decent alumni base in Atlanta. Certainly, it has alums scattered through the South, and Georgia Tech at a place where I don't know how excited folks are with that program.
and they're
So,
not going to be very good. So I think
no, they're
that's
not.
yeah.
So, yeah, I
So
mean, really, you're looking at LSU, or excuse me, Auburn probably in Oxford, and again, that's in your backyard if you're Ole Miss.
yeah,
So before it starts to get mostly challenging, other than Kentucky at home. But anyway, at Arkansas, that was a phenomenal game a year ago. I believe Ole Miss went for 2 on the last play of the game and got it to win 52-51 in a thriller of a game. I presume it'll be that again. And then closing with the Egg Bowl. This time that is in Oxford. That's always an entertaining game. Mississippi State's supposed to be a pretty good team again this year. I would say those two are close to evenly matched. I have a feeling points are going to be plenty, but really fun close here for the Rebels, and I can't wait to watch really all those games.
yeah. No, it's a great finish to the season. Like you said, I mean, really, you could start even with the first SEC game against Kentucky. But yeah, it's a strong finish, but it is one where, like we said, if Ole Miss is kind of at the point where they've got everything clicking on offense, and maybe where things need to be defensively, then yeah, I mean, they're going to give themselves a shot. But I mean, there's still no two ways around it. I mean, there's going to be challenging road games at LSU, A&M, Arkansas. Those are all going to be a challenge, I think, even with LSU. Like we said, maybe not having the expectations of winning a national championship this season, but A&M top 10 team, perhaps Arkansas. We've said it. We're very high on them heading into the season. So yeah, it's a very entertaining finish. I think when you look at just the styles and what you're going to get with those final 4 games specifically.
Any final thoughts on the Ole Miss schedule?
No, it's yeah, like we said, it's I mean, I circle me in there with that group of teams that, that people that think that Ole Miss could really like I said, I mean, really, maybe they are a surprise. Maybe that's the best way to word it. Although, like we said, we don't know if it's necessarily surprise in the truest sense of the word. But man, the schedules. I think those first 6 games, man. Like I said, if they're 6-0 or something going into this final six, look out! Like it's could be quite a ride for the Rebels.
Well, Ole Miss has 7 games at home. It's the number 30 strength of schedule, according to Phil Steele. It'll be interesting. We hope you're finding all of our previews of SEC schedules interesting. Again, if we have not gotten to your favorite SEC team and done that yet, and you can check that out on our YouTube channel, I hope you'll subscribe there. You can find 7 or 8, 9 that we've done so far. I'm losing count, and the rest are all coming very soon. So thanks for watching. Again, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back with another one of these tomorrow.